Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, a podcast where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Aneeqa, and in this episode I'm joined by Amina, Cara and Laura to talk about climate change and offer our points of view on how nuclear energy can potentially help us to deal with this massive crisis that humanity is facing. So, to start off, I want to ask Cara, why do you care about climate change?
Thanks, Aneeqa. Good question. I think, we were talking about this earlier, and I said a really good example about why I care about climate change is that we've seen the future that we could end up with in Wall-E, and that's not what any of us want. I like being able to go out for a walk amongst the trees and be able to see some nature, and I think overall we need to protect it because it's kind of what we owe to the planet. And a really great thing I heard recently was that someone said planetary health equals people's health, which equals the economic health. So really overall we need to have a healthy planet so we can have a healthy society.
Absolutely, and Wall-E is a tearjerker of a movie.
It is.
I've not watched that movie. Amina, what about you? Why do you care about climate change?
So I have two little girls, and I would like them to have a green future. I would like them, like Cara, to be able to go out into the woods, have a walk, breathe some fresh air, and have these options and just keep things going. I mean, when I'm having a stressful day, just being able to go for a walk and breathe in some fresh air, it really calms me down. And to think that potentially the future generations couldn't have that, that's a really sad thing to even imagine, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Absolutely, it's definitely something that we take for granted, being able to go out for a walk and breathing clean air, and having that for children and our future is so important.
Yeah, COVID's completely highlighted that. When we've been in lockdown and stuff, and everyone's just even to be able to go out and have a walk, like it's just been amazing. So you take things for granted.
Laura, what about you?
For me, it's what I grew up with. So I was born in the northeast of England in the mid 1980s, which was when like the miners' strikes and things like that were going on for the coal miners. So I sort of grew up with this backdrop of jobs had been taken from people, and it was related to how we were polluting the planet as well. And there's this idea that you can do it better. You can have societies that live sustainably, that have jobs that don't have such a big harm on the environment, and therefore, as Cara said, it's just better for everyone. So it's what I'm used to. It's everything I've been taught says that we should try and do something to stop climate change.
So now we've got some idea of why people care about climate change. What can we do? One of the biggest contributors to climate change is the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation. Electricity is generated from a wide range of sources, all with advantages and disadvantages. And recently, the International Energy Agency, or the IEA, has been collecting data on electricity use to help us figure out what we're using and what changes we can make. For example, in 2018, the electricity consumption in the UK was 4.9 megawatt hours per person. Now, if we can compare this to another country, such as Pakistan, which is only 0.6 megawatt hours per person, which indicates that there's a huge disparity in how much electricity different countries consume. So when we're talking about, having these conversations, not only do we need to look at how much electricity we're using, but where our electricity comes from. So in the UK, our electricity typically comes from a mix of renewables, nuclear, biomass, imports, and unfortunately, a lot still comes from fossil fuels in the form of gas. But there is talk of a green industrial revolution, which would diversify the energy mix by expanding renewables and delivering new nuclear power. Yeah, it's something that the international agency I was talking about also mentions in their sustainable development scenario. However, we have to be, mindful that there's no one solution. And nationally and internationally, we need a diverse energy mix to meet the net zero targets. Now, when you dig into the data, you can see how electricity in the UK is generated on any given day to meet demand. We've recently used this electricinsights.co.uk website to look at the energy mix in the UK, and we chose a couple of days. So we looked at the 8th of March, where most of the demand was actually met by gas. There was 50% was met by gas, and only 13% of demand was met by wind. If we fast forward, however, to the 13th of March, and these numbers are pretty much reversed, we're getting 19% being met by gas and 46% by wind. So on the days where wind wasn't blowing, natural gas made up for the shortfall. So I want to ask our panelists, if we didn't have natural gas to fill in the gap on days that weren't windy, what kind of things would you do?
So I guess the most obvious answer, if you've got nothing else, is just to sit and wait. which I would be really uncomfortable with. I like knowing what's happening, and if you don't know how long you're going to be without electricity for, especially if you're in the north of England like I am, where it's dark an awful lot of the day in winter. I think we only get like 6 or 8 hours of daylight, and I wouldn't have heating because I need a pump that is run on electricity to generate, like, get the water going around my heating system. I'd just be sitting in the dark and the cold, I think, which is fairly miserable to think about.
It doesn't sound nice. What about you, Cara or Amina?
I guess, well, it depends what was down. If they still somehow had the telephone signals going okay, I guess I would just sparingly use the battery in my phone. So like you said, I would just sit and wait and hopefully it'll be okay. So I'd maybe go to, and then example, you could go to a neighboring area where they didn't have the same problems of the power being down. So yeah, maybe I'd go sit outside somewhere that I was close to working phone towers still. And I could take advantage of that. Maybe plug my phone into a train station, plug socket in the wall, for example.
I love how the most important technology is your phone, Cara. That's no heating, no light, but phone is like #1 priority for this scenario where we don't have enough electricity to keep things going.
I'm a millennial. I can have candlelight for light, it's fine. But I need my phone for everything else.
We need to have access to social media and Candy Crush. That's like a high priority. What about you, Amina?
I think for me, it would have to be coming up with some practical solutions. If I know that this is going to happen, get a wood burner in the house. I don't know, maybe get some more glass in the house so that you can maximize daylight. I don't know. You'd have to do some out of the box thinking to be able to accommodate that. Again, I've got little girls, so for me, it would be a lot of planning how to, all their meals and stuff, all the microwave meals will have to go out of the window. And as any parent would know, that is a huge lifesaver. So yeah, a lot of planning would be required, layers and yeah, all eventualities you'd have to think of, and it's inconvenient, let's say the least.
I can imagine eating a lot of cold baked beans.
Yeah.
Living like an undergraduate again.
I hope you didn't need cold baked beans as an undergraduate.
If you're living in an apartment, you don't even have gas cookers, right? So you've got electricity. So if you're thinking, I mean, from a house point of view, at least I've got gas cooker and stuff. But like I know that there will be plenty of people out there who don't have like gas cookers and stuff, so they'll have electricity. So for them, you're literally taking everything away from them, aren't you? All sorts of food aspects and stuff, you're taking them all away. And in an apartment, you don't necessarily have that much daylight coming through anyways, and yeah.
That's a fair point, actually. But I guess I live in an apartment that don't have gas in it. But what I do have is it's actually a modern build, which is built really, really well. So it's almost like passive house standards. So I don't use central heating because I don't need to. So actually, that's a good consideration that in winter, if we were then relying on having no heating sources, is there something around like going forward, making sure our houses are built slightly better? So some aspects of it don't rely so much on energy sources.
One type of technology that people are considering is like having kind of more centralized heating for cities, for example, to have like, instead of everyone having their own boilers, having a kind of centralized heating system across the city. And also this kind of thing about small solutions, which you've all been discussing, that kind of stuff already is occurring around the world in places with kind of shortages of electricity. For example, I've seen like in Afghanistan, they have like these solar powered cookers almost. So it's not a solar panel, so it doesn't have all the high tech technology related with a solar panel, but it's literally like a huge mirror made of loads of tiny mirrors that's curved and concentrates the light from the sun, which you can then basically concentrates the heat, and you can use that to cook and heat water and things like that. So I think these kinds of small solutions that people are talking about are really important, but obviously we do need to talk about the bigger scale and about national solutions as well. So we've talked about what we do individually in our own homes if we didn't have access to enough electricity, but what do you think we could do on a national level to kind of reduce the amount of fossil fuels we're using and look at other solutions that are cleaner?
I guess, well, the first thing I'll say is just in reference, are you talking about different solutions in different countries? There's some really great resources online. People are interested in that kind of thing, and it's kind of where I first cut my teeth on the kind of more out of the box thinking with engineering. And so one would be Engineers Without Borders, who I've always championed massively what they do, and another one is Practical Action. And they both are charities who do lots of work in different countries around the world and who partner with organizations in different countries to really kind of highlight what great technology there is on a small scale. But then trying to bring that back to a bigger scale, I guess one solution is that maybe is not so great for climate change is the UK is currently in the process of possibly opening up the first deep coal mine for the first time in what, 50 years or something ridiculous like that, which might bring us back energy security, but there's questions around whether that's really good for the future of climate change. I'll just leave that hanging there, shall I?
I think that mine's a really interesting thing to consider, because I think what gets missed a lot in the media, it's a very separate conversation this, but it's actually for creating steel, which would be useful for making wind turbines. It's not going to be used solely for the purpose of creating electricity, but for some reason the media keeps missing that point and like jumping on the sort of the climate change agenda and relating coal to electricity generation. But you're right in that we need to find some sort of alternate mass power source to plug that gap. And I guess, well, partly it's plugging that gap that already exists. It's also reducing our demand, right? So we can make things more efficient. So it's sort of balancing the supply with demand question.
So I didn't realize that was actually mostly for steel. I thought it was for energy production, and I wondered how it got under my radar up until suddenly it was there, and I was like, how is this there? And that would be because I'm not aware of the steel industry in any way. So obviously I wasn't hearing these conversations, so that reassures me slightly that I didn't just miss something. But also, yeah, I think definitely it's back to the passive house thing, which I just said. It's about reducing our demand. Arguably, you know, lots of energy materials go into building passive house in the first place, but, you know, we'll have to start thinking about the whole life cycle cost of different things. So that's one of it. And another solution I could maybe just throw in there is batteries. We need better batteries. We need to be able to store power so we can rely on things which are intermittent, like wind and solar. So that's one part of the solution. And I know there's some really great things happening in the UK, different research around batteries. And you could delve into some of the conspiracies around the policy stopping that and why they don't get so much funding if you really wanted to. But I don't know that much detail to really say it today. But there is some interesting technology for sure coming from that.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of developments coming out of quite different sectors. I mean, one of the big things is smart meters for figuring out what the peaks and troughs are in demand, which could help with generating like smart grids that can adapt, like balance the load somehow, depending on what demand actually is, which I think sounds really ambitious.
Yeah, so I have smart meters I've always been not known so much about. It's interesting you bring that up because there's always this thing. I work with some data scientists, and it's always like we've been collecting so much data for years and years and doing nothing with it. So the smart meters themselves aren't going to change anything. We have to take the data and do something with it. And once we start doing those clever things, that's when we can make the change. But back to my flat again. My flat is only, I think this week, 1 year old of construction. I have a smart meter that is the first generation. They installed a first generation smart meter that my energy provider can't connect to. And they've told me I've got bad reception in my area. So even if they wanted to upgrade to the new one, I can't. So I now have a smart meter which has been installed and it looks great because they can put it on the perspectives of the flats. It doesn't work. I have to myself, I spent a few weeks there, going in once a day, checking my own meter readings just to see how much energy I was using, even though my smart meter was sitting there flashing red next to it because it wasn't connected to anything. So there's definitely some barriers to technology.
We've got the same issue. We've got a brand new smart meter, everything's all there, but no, guess what? When we need a reading, we have to get into tight nook and crannies to be able to get a reading, to be able to give it to them.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point that for years people have been collecting data and not doing much with it, because the UK government, decades ago, was like, we will invest in new nuclear builds, we will have these new power stations, and not a lot seems to have happened. I mean, obviously, like Hinkley Point C seems to get in the news a lot for various reasons.
It's important to realize that although these things are really great and stuff, like nuclear energy is like a solid, sustainable source of energy, but the current sort of mechanism that we've got to build the nuclear sites, they have a lot of red tape that they need to get through, and there's a lot of stuff which is built into it, which makes it a very lengthy process. And whether that's actually practical or not is another discussion, I think, for the UK. But then SMRs can come into it. So small modular reactors. And this is basically they are making nuclear reactors, but on a smaller scale. And plants throughout the country, which will produce less electricity, but they will require less upfront cost, because for a regular nuclear build, for a regular nuclear plant, you will need a really big investment, whereas these in comparison need a smaller investment, produce less energy, but if you have more of them frequently, then you could fill the gap that way. So that would be a really good sustainable source of energy for the UK mix. It's not the solution, but for the mix, it would be quite good. Like you highlighted that on different days, we use different amounts. So wind and gas, we use different amounts of energy from both of them. And this could just be part of the mix. It could be a solid baseline kind of energy source into the mix.
Yes, I think the data on that Electric Insights website, I think it has nuclear as sort of like a constant about 14-ish% contribution to meeting demand. It doesn't seem to vary that much.
It does vary, sort of like when there's shutdown periods and those kind of things. But yeah, generally you're right. It's sort of stable.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's the sort of thing that with like a national program, it could be coordinated so it would continue to supply that sort of that base demand, and it'd be topped up with other less reliable sources. Yeah. Is that the right phrase?
I think the small modular route it kind of addresses the issues with larger reactors of any kind, which they just take so long to build. Like if we're having this issue today, where we need to address this. We needed to have addressed this about 10 years ago, or even further back, to be honest. So we should have done it even previously. So having technology which is quicker to set up, which obviously when things are smaller, it's a lot faster to set up the technology and get things available and up and running. And I guess if it's smaller, it can also be used in like remote communities as well. It doesn't have to be close to large groups of people. You can even use it in remote rural areas, places like where they were planning to build that the new coal mine, for example, which I think is not too far from you, Laura.
No, it would be just a few miles up the road from my house, actually. I'd go past it on my Sunday run.
I think, a lot of interesting different concepts. And to kind of tie everything together, there's a lot of different solutions that we need to pursue to fill the gap that we face when trying to get rid of fossil fuels. But I think the key thing from that is there's no one silver bullet, there's no one perfect solution that will meet all of the requirements of the UK or internationally of the world. For example, we need to have a wide variety of mixes. Do people want to comment on why we need to have a variety, or kind of reiterate some points that they've made?
I guess I'll say the variety is really important, because I think what we've discussed here is the technology isn't always the barrier, it's the implementation of how people do that. And so to get the policy working and to get the finance behind it, it's going to take lots of different initiatives together. And inevitably that's going to mean different approaches to technology. Not everyone's going to agree to invest in the same thing and to do community-led projects, for example, all looking at nuclear. They'll maybe want to do solar instead. So yeah, it'll be a variety of people being involved, which means a variety of technologies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think any financial accountant would say if you're going to invest in something, you need to diversify. Don't just invest in one thing, right?
I like that. Good comparison.
So if you're doing some energy accountancy, maybe you'd say the same
also,
thing.
There are advantages to every sort of solution. You can't sort of say, well, wind is the way to go, and that's the only way. Everyone should be open to different possibilities, and there are good things and bad things with each one. And it's important to get the best from each one, and to be able to do that, you will need a mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, totally agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's been a really interesting conversation, and hopefully we've showcased a variety of technologies that we feel could be used to address climate change and kind of the important role that nuclear could play, especially through small modular reactors. I think that was one of the things that we came up with. So I hope that's been useful for everyone, and I just want to say a huge thank you to Amina, Cara and Laura for their insights today. That's been really, really fantastic.
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.